adenosine triphosphate, and that's a form of energy. Now, ATP synthesis, which means the making of ATP requires oxygen and produces carbon dioxide. How quickly is ATP made and used? How long does it take? Immediately. Usually 60 seconds is made and used. Drives the need to breathe to take oxygen and eliminate carbon dioxide. Now, the respiratory system consists of tubes that deliver air to the lung. Oxygen is diffused, and we know diffusion is taking it from a higher concentration to a lower concentration, okay, in the blood. And then where does the oxygen bind to? What type of form elements?
Hemoglobin.
Hemoglobin, yes, but what specific?
Heat.
RBCs, red blood cells, okay? And carbon dioxide diffuses out. Now, respiratory and cardiovascular system works together to deliver oxygen to tissue and remove CO2. Remember when we talked about the heart is centrally located, and on each side of the heart is the right and left lung, correct? Which side of the heart caters to the pulmonary system?
Right.
The right side of the heart, good. Now, the left side is use what type of system?
Systemic.
Systemic, very good. Now, this is known as the cardiopulmonary, which means the heart and the lung system. Disorder in the lung directly affects heart, and then any problems in the heart directly affects the lung. So it's vice versa. Okay, respiratory system and urinary system collaborate to regulate body acid and base balance, but you'll see that more when you do 204 next week. You'll come next semester. Now, what does respiration mean? Respiration has three meanings. Ventilation, anytime you're venting, you're basically breathing of the lungs, so you should know that. Exchanges of gases, you pick up CO2 and you get rid of CO2. And basically, there's a particular structure we're going to talk about, which is the alveoli. That's where that occurs. And it's between the blood and the tissue fluid. The use of oxygen is in a cellular metabolism. What is the function of respiratory system, which means what is it used for? The function of respiratory is to provide O2 and CO2 exchange between the blood and the air. Okay, our body needs O2, but it needs to get rid of CO2. Also, respiration allows us to speak, to vocalize our words. Also, it helps with the sense of smell. Now, when we talked about the bone a few weeks ago, what area do you think the sense of smell or the cranial nerve for smell sits?
By the
A little anterior to that.
The butterfly.
Ovale.
You guys give up?
Yeah.
Remember front plate.
There
There you go.
That's where the olfactory nerve sits.
That's right.
Okay. And it affects the pH body and eliminates CO2. So you should know the functions of the respiratory system and the meaning of respiratory system. Don't forget, I think next week's quiz is on blood vessels and it's on respiration.
And the field circulation?
Yeah, maybe 2 questions. I have to remember throwing 2 questions. But if I don't, we'll get back. You'll see on the final. I'll remember to throw it on. I might forget.
75 questions.
Okay. Now, blood pressure is made by the vasoconstrictor. Vasal always mean what? Arteries and veins, right? Constrictor means closing it up. It uses angiotensin too. Breathing creates pressure between the thorax and the abdomen and the flow of lymph and venous. We know there's lymph nodes all over the body. That's how fluid gets out of our bodies. Venous is basically the veins. Now, holding your breath and expelling abdominal content, such as urination, defecation, childbirth, is called the Valsalva maneuver. This is a type of orthopedic test that is used to see if there's any space occupying lesion in the body. Usually the doctor will actually pretend that you're bear down, like you're going into a balloon. That's the Valsalva maneuver. And usually you do this on a daily basis when you do your bodily functions such as urination, defecation, and giving birth. Now, the nose, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, and lungs, incoming air stops in the alveoli. Alveoli, remember I told you way back when, looks like little grape, like pockets. And that's where oxygen, there's gas exchange between oxygen and CO2. Now, millions of thin wall microscopic air sacs, the exchange of gases with the bloodstream through the alveolar walls and then flows back. That's usually happens in these areas. Hold up. Conducting division of the respiratory system has no gas exchange, so you should know that. Has no gas exchange, has only for airflow. And it reaches from the nostrils to the bronchioles. Bronchioles are the extension that's coming off the trachea. Remember when we looked at the heart, you have the trachea, and then the branches coming off of the branchia, they have right and left, those are the bronchioles. Eventually, those are embedded inside of the lung tissue. And then after that point, you'll get the alveoli. You should know respiratory division consists of alveoli and other gas exchange. There's upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. Upper respiratory tract is the nose through the larynx. Lower respiratory tract is the trachea through the lungs. Now, for lab purposes, at least for my lab, since you guys have a lot of structures to study, I'm not going to give you too much more on your list to study because you have enough to look at. But questions commonly, again, if you're not in my lab, don't worry about it. I'm just putting it out there for them real quick. Like this is sometimes one of the commonly asked one. This right here is the trachea. You see this little flap right here? This is another commonly asked question on the lab practical. Epiglottis. Remember I told you the epiglottis is important because when you're eating and you don't want the food to go down the trachea, because then that gives you the cough reflex or choking reflex, the epiglottis is there to kind of slide over the trachea so then the food could go down to the esophagus. Because remember, the esophagus and trachea are close to each other. What is that ligament that separates the esophagus and the trachea? A small ligament we spoke about in lab. Starts with an A. Annular ligament? No?
No. Not ringing any bell.
But I didn't say it. Okay. Now, this is the right lung and this is the left lung. The reason you automatically should know like this is the right lung because the right lung consists of 3 lobes. Same as the cusp. Tricuspid have 3 cusps. The lungs have 3 lobes as well. They have a superior, middle, and inferior. Then the left lung only has 2 lobes, just like the left heart has 2 lobes, bicuspid. You see the similarities? Mm-hmm. Okay. The bronchus, all these bronchus going in are embedded inside of the lung tissue. This right here is known as the apex of the lung. And then here's the apex of the heart. This tissue right there is the diaphragm. These are the conchae. See that? This will be superior, middle, and inferior conchae. Now the function of the nose is to basically warm and cleanse and humidify inhaled air. It is also there to detect smell. Okay. Now this is the nasal region. Again, I won't ask you anything about this in lab. This is like self-explanatory, but you don't have to worry about the nasal bone and all that. We've already gone through this before.